Welcome to Shaka Extra Time. I am Paul Ndiho, and joining me on Shaka Extra Time is Shaka Sali himself, aka the Kabale Kid. Hello, Shaka.
Hugely terrific, Paul. It's been quite some time, actually, since I last saw you.
Good to be back. I feel great to be back here.
You're most welcome.
Yeah. So, and a warm welcome to you, all our Facebook followers watching us live on Facebook. Today we are once again answering your questions, and Shaka Sali will be taking those questions. But before we take your questions, let me maybe start by asking Shaka to tell us about America's independence. Americans are celebrating Independence Day today. What is the significance of celebrating this day today?
You know, it is said, of course, that the United States gained its independence on 4th of July, 1776. In fact, history will show that actually it gained independence on the 2nd of July, even though they do not celebrate the 2nd, they celebrate the 4th. And of course, they got it through struggle, through fighting against the British Empire. And it was all about attaining what they consider to be really dignity, human dignity, which translated, of course, into political freedoms. And by the way, today is, if I remember my history correctly, is probably the 241st independence anniversary.
How big a deal is that? When you look at it, America still says it's a young nation. But you look at African countries that have maybe 50 years old, 60 years old, and they're saying they're still young nations. So in most cases, people get confused. When America says it's celebrating its 241st birthday, and look at other countries, let's say in Africa, that are celebrating 50 years, 60 years of independence, and they're saying they're young nations. How do you explain that?
Well, first of all, it is a huge deal. It's not simply a big deal for the United States really being independent for that long, and it has accomplished a lot. And of course, it talks about always trying to be a sort of perfect union, if it were, because it is not yet. It does have a lot of problems. For example, frankly, I don't see why you should even talk about socio-economic injustice in the United States of America, because America, I think, most people would agree with me, is capable of looking after everybody, frankly, that breathes air on these United States of America. It's a great country. It has accomplished a lot, as I said, but still has a long way to go. And I hope that these upcoming young nations can take a leaf from it, because America, by the way, became a major industrial power after 50 years of political independence. And frankly, a lot of African countries are in that neighborhood, 50 years after independence. Mm. And lots of them, yes, they do have perhaps more universities, probably more people who have had quote-unquote modern education and what have you. They probably have slightly more infrastructure, and you name it, and people are probably a little bit more exposed, speak more English and what have you, interacted more with the rest of the world, but there isn't really much, really, to show for it. Perhaps because, for the most part, it is a learning experience, and some of the leaders, frankly, have fell short of what should be expected of them.
I just wanted to follow up on something that I just said. You said that America is able to take care of its people. Everybody is taken care of in this country. But I just came from California, and the narrative there is sort of different. You find so many homeless people in America, in California, and these same people today are celebrating independence. Is there a reason for those kinds of people to celebrate? I mean, when you look at it in the context of other countries, should somebody who doesn't have a job, who is homeless, be celebrating independence?
I don't know that I said that, and if I did, then frankly, I didn't mean to say that America has been, you know, is capable. I probably said is capable. But probably if I said it does take care of all its people, it must be a mistake. I may have misspoke. I think basically what I really wanted to mean or to say is that America, given its resources, given its power, given its stature, it should be able, because it has the capability, the capacity to take care of every one of its children. But unfortunately, it does not. You don't need, in fact, to go to California to talk about people who are homeless. Every day I leave this building. This happens to be the nation's capital, and to a large extent, perhaps the capital, in fact, of the world, because some of the decisions that are made here affect not only Americans, but affect a lot of people globally. So America has no excuse, frankly, of not embracing social economic justice for all Americans.
Now, point well taken. Let's cross over to Africa. The 29th biannual meeting is underway in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, the Ethiopian capital. War, conflict, hunger, and famine have overshadowed this year's theme on youth and investment. Your thoughts?
As a matter of fact, that is very, very appropriate, because it is, in a sense, a realistic reflection of essentially what is happening on that beautiful continent, and especially the theme focusing largely on the changing demographics on the continent, because those are the future of Africa. There's no question about it. And for that matter, I think I agree with those who actually say the future is not tomorrow, is not much later. The future is today. And then when you talk about the conflicts, we look at, for example, South Sudan, a country, frankly, that surely it becomes very difficult and very disturbing sometimes for someone to even think about what is happening in South Sudan. This is a most recent independent nation whose ancestors spent generations really fighting for political freedom. This is a country that is incredibly rich in resources, especially the natural resources, because the human resource, in fact, there are very few people. They actually have the capacity to open up their immigration, invite people to come in so that they can help develop the country, because you're talking about oil, gas, you're talking about gold, you're talking about diamond. And you know, you can't believe this, Paul, but I have had the dubious privilege of overflying that country not once but twice. And you cannot believe that the country is not under cultivation, and yet it is one of the most fertile territory. You could imagine this place, in fact, not only becoming perhaps the bread basket of the region, but perhaps even much beyond. We're talking about this could be a bread basket of the region and the Middle East in particular. And yet, they are at each other's throat. I don't know why the leaders, frankly, can't somehow see themselves in the mirror and say, you know what, I think that this Republic of South Sudan is greater than some of us, individuals. They should put, I think, the interest of the Sudanese people and the Republic of Sudan above their selfish, parochial interests.
Shaka, you talked about the youth of Africa being the future leaders of tomorrow. You actually reminded me of my president, who used to sing when I was a young boy that we are the future leaders of tomorrow. The last time I checked, he's still in power. 32 years later, you can also look around the leaders in the region, talk about Robert Mugabe, who, by the way, just donated $1 million to African Union. They talk about youth investment in youth. But this is just a facade. They're just in it for themselves. I'm still waiting for my turn. Your thoughts?
Well, first of all, if you actually know that it is a facade, that it is an illusion, that they are merely talking politics, they are merely talking the talk, without necessarily really having to walk that particular talk, so that you and a lot of others can begin to walk the walk. I think it is high time that you and your colleagues actually stepped up to play, figured out a way of making a very clear signal to these people who keep talking the talk without walking the talk. Because let's face it, if you talk about Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni himself, he happened to be a very young man when he led a group going to the bush and saying, and perhaps rightly so, that he was going to fight to restore democracy. Because at that time there was no democracy. And he has since come back, and actually last time I heard him say that he brought democracy to the people of Uganda. Now it's up to you, Ugandans, and especially you, the younger generation really, to believe whether or not Yoweri Museveni and his colleagues brought to you democracy, and in fact that is what you are enjoying. And if you feel that there is no such a thing as democracy that he brought to you, then maybe you should figure out a way of actually making him, realize that he didn't bring democracy. If in fact democracy means, at least as Abraham Lincoln once suggested, that it is a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, I doubt that that's what you are seeing there. In fact, some people say what you probably see in a country like Uganda is a government of some people or some individuals, by some people or by some individuals, and for some people and some individuals. Which means, of course, the vast majority of Ugandans really are almost like going through what someone would characterize as a sort of sharecropping.
Shaka, let's talk about Zimbabwe donating $1 million to the African Union. What is that supposed to mean? You have people in Zimbabwe right now who don't even have food to put on the table. But the government or the president of Zimbabwe, President Robert Mugabe, can donate money that would have otherwise gone to maybe roads, hospitals,
right,
or even just putting food, bringing in foreign aid as food to distribute to people. But he's donating money to African Union. What's that supposed to mean?
Incredible. First of all, I think on a positive note, the fact of the matter is that he has donated, of course, as you rightly said, $1 million to the African Union, an institution, frankly, that needs anything that it can get from anywhere. Because let's face it, the last time I checked, Paul, doing my research, there are different kind of percentages. Some people will say perhaps up to about 60%, and others in fact would say more than 75% of the money that supports that great African institution actually comes from donors who happen not to be Africans. Most of it comes from the European Union, and some of it from the United States, and some of it from China. As a matter of fact, that incredible building, which cost, I guess, about, or in the neighborhood of more than 200 million US dollars, is actually a gift from Beijing. It was not built by the African people themselves.
We can't even own our own building.
That is very true. And you know what? The last time I checked, there is a saying that whoever in fact pays the piper calls the tune. You will be surprised and probably shocked that a lot of member countries of the African Union do not even in fact pay their contributions yearly. there are a lot of countries which are in arrears, you know, have not been paid really, which is supposed to be a very simple thing. So I think Zimbabwean President Robert Gabriel Mugabe, I don't know whether in fact his country has been paying its contributions, but the fact that at least he has been maybe the first individual African leader, you know, government leader or non-government leader who has made that contribution, I think I would look at it as a positive step in the right direction. When you talk about how people in Zimbabwe are poor, yes, it is true, but someone might also ask you, look at the United States of America. It is the richest country on this planet Earth. It actually goes to, it goes on expeditions to the moon, outer space, and what have you. It has a lot of multi-billionaires and what have you. And yet, it in fact contributes a lot of money to other countries, not only in millions, in billions. It gives, for example, a lot of money to the state of Israel in billions, and the country, for example, known as Egypt. And yet, when you actually going to Virginia, before you cross the Potomac, you'll be surprised to see how many individuals are homeless in this particular country. Now, the problem is, of course, that from what I see, the president says that it was his personal money, that he sold 300 cows. He auctioned 300 cows.
How did he get on 300 cows?
Yeah, but you know, we have heard that before. There was a man who was a founding president of the Ivory Coast called Ufebwanyi himself, who said that he used his personal money, more than 200 million US dollars, to build a Catholic basilica in Yamoussoukro, his home, you know, neighborhood where he was born, ironically, in a neighborhood that is largely populated by Muslims, people of the Muslim faith. He said it was his personal money. Of course, he was a president, and a president that obviously was not as democratic as you would think, so it would be very difficult for you to figure out whether, in fact, the money was from his pocket or was from the central bank.
Mobutu used to say the same thing. Let's go to our Facebook comments. Augustine Tamba from Liberia wants to know, how can African journalists help build a better democracy in Africa?
I think they can do a lot of things. First of all, being journalists that, you know, what's the sort that they are, they should be able to make their leaders accountable. They should also be able to educate, you know, their populations. They should get into the business of, for example, civic education, especially where governments, frankly, are not doing what they are supposed to do, which is engaging in civic education, making sure that their people know what their rights are, know that in fact a president, a cabinet minister, a district commissioner and what have you, these are not their bosses. These are their servants, or these are their employees. They are the masters. They are the primary stakeholders of those countries where they come from. So I think journalists can do a lot, especially when they get into that business of making people aware, sensitizing people about things that affect them, and you know, giving them information that helps them to make, at the end of the day, informed decisions.
Let's go to another comment from Asaraf Abase in Sudan. He wants to know, what is the African Union plan to stop mass immigration of the youth from the continent?
I don't know sincerely whether first of all, that is the business of the African Union, because as you know, Paul, the African Union, yes, it is a very, very powerful continental institution, but the last time I checked, it does not have sovereign powers. We've just talked about, for example, how it even doesn't have resources. It does not have money, for example. It in fact depends on monies from somewhere else. So I think that responsibility perhaps falls on the individual countries, individual member states. There are 55 that make up the African Union. I think that that's where we should look, we should see. First and foremost, these people need to create conditions that trigger up conditions that provide employment. How do they do that? Maybe to come up with some very innovative, creative, imaginative, educational programs that provide the necessary skills that their populations can employ so that they do not think about moving out of where they are, going somewhere else. So they have to do something, frankly, that motivates people, that empowers people, that reduces the anxiousness among their populations to avoid the forces that push and to embrace the forces supposedly that pull. So it's about creating an environment where people feel that they can do something to make their lives relevant to themselves and their neighborhood. I think it's jobs, 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 education, skills, and freedoms, political freedoms and what have you, where people feel that they have dignity. They have dignity and they can actually have skills and an opportunity to make some positive contributions.
Speaking of political freedoms, let's go to one Simon Oriema from Uganda. He asks, can you please compare and contrast the monopolistic dominance of President Kagame and President Museveni?
Well, I don't know exactly what he means, but the last time
they have monopolized the power. Yeah.
They have monopolized the power, they have democratized maybe the political space and all that kind of stuff. You know, it is very, very interesting because when you actually talk to individuals who come from Uganda about Rwanda, they seem to think that there is something great happening in Rwanda. And by the same token, when you talk about to some Rwandans or Rwandese, they actually think that Uganda is doing better. So it seems to me that on either side, for some strange reason, some people think the grass is greener on the other side. But having said that, one has to know the circumstances, the backgrounds of these two individuals. First of all, with due respect to Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni, you have to look at him as some people have actually characterized him with the in relationship to Rwanda. You have to look at him as the tutor. And that Kagame, in fact, given that he worked under Mr. Museveni at one time, both in the bush and the government in Uganda, you have to look at him as the pupil. So
a very smart pupil.
A very smart pupil. So you could probably say that the pupil has eventually climbed on the shoulders of the tutor. And if he in fact succeeds in doing that, he obviously has the capability of seeing a little bit further.
Well, you can argue that he has a long neck, so he has...
He's a tall man. And so when he's a tall man, as somebody once said, he can see very far just like a giraffe. But having said that, you look at the facts on the ground. In each of those two countries, frankly, no one, I think, can argue about the fact that there is a need really for more openness of the space. There is a need for democracy because there is neither democracy, as I talk from what I have seen, either in Kigali, the Rwandan capital, or Kampala, the Ugandan capital. You have a situation where they hold what they call elections, and other people have suggested that in fact this should be perhaps referred to as selections. The reason is being very simple. They say that whenever you have elections in Kigali or have elections in Kampala, the results don't seem to reflect the will of the people. Rather, they seem to reflect the people that count the votes. And who are these people who count the votes? They are people that in fact are specifically appointed to do that by those specific individuals in power in both Kigali and Kampala.
We have time for one quick comment. Belaja Sero asks, what is the purpose of education in Africa when the educated class that has culminated all of our problems?
It's very interesting about the education. In fact, I was talking with someone earlier about perhaps the need for, frankly, revamping really the educational curriculum in most of the African countries. Yes, when people go to school, especially because education in Africa for the most part is not a right, it is a privilege. And so those particular individuals get the sort of skills that help them to dominate the economy through dominating, of course, the politics of that particular country. And frankly, at the end of the day, those individuals have very much proven to be very selfish, certainly not nationalistic. They don't seem to be their brothers' or neighbors' keeper. They seem to be patriotic to their stomachs, really. The stomachs of their families and the stomachs of their friends, not society. They don't even think to have plans for people who have not received an education, as if people who have not received an education are not citizens. So I think that at the end of the day, we need to have a people who not only think about themselves individually, but think about the entire society, including those who have not received modern education.
Very briefly, what are you talking about tomorrow on Straight Talk Africa?
We're actually going to look at what we would call, we are reflecting on the session, the 29th session of the African Union Summit in Addis Ababa, which ends today. And we are looking at its theme, which of course is looking at the changing demographics of the continent, and perhaps figure out how to address and end really the obtaining conflicts on the continent, in particular South Sudan and places like Somalia.
Well, on that note, I thank you all for joining us. Shaka, thank you. I'll look forward to seeing you on another edition of Shaka Extra Time next week.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Take care.